At my brother's housewarming. His wife tilted her glass toward me and said, "Some of us actually work for what we have." They all laughed. The kind of laughter that makes you feel like furniture instead of family. I smiled, set my plate down, and left before dessert. That night my father called. His voice threaded with urgency. "Rach, the company needs a small favor. Just a short loan. About $200,000. You've always been good with numbers." I stared at the phone, listening to the same tone he used when asking me to be reasonable as a kid. I said, "Numbers don't fix pride." "Dad." He didn't get it. He never did. "I'm Rachel Danner, a real estate investment consultant. I spend my days turning undervalued properties into quiet profits for people who believe in contracts more than promises." 5 years ago, when Danner and Sons Construction was drowning in debt, I became their anonymous investor through a shell fund called Stonebridge Partners. They never asked who rescued them. They were too busy toasting themselves for being brilliant. I let them keep the illusion. Every family has its religion, ours was denial. At the party tonight, I watched Evan play the successful heir, his watch flashing like a trophy. Lara posed for photos that would later become proof of a life well lit. My parents floated between guests, smiling through borrowed confidence. They didn't see me as part of the picture, just a shadow standing where the light didn't reach. I realized I'd become what every family business secretly needs: a silent investor they could insult and still depend on. When my father's call ended, I opened the safe in my apartment. The contract sat there, embossed with his signature and one clause he never read. Stonebridge Partners could request a full buyout within 30 days if the company failed to meet dividend obligations. I whispered to the empty room, "Some of us actually work for what we have." To agree. The next morning, Evan's text arrived first. "Family dinner tonight. Lara wants everyone here by 6. I almost ignored it, but habit made me show up. The house smelled like new money and lavender polish. Lara greeted me with a smile too white to be kind. "You made it," she said, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "Some of us had to rearrange actual work schedules to be here." Evan laughed, adding, "Come on. She's fine. Rachel doesn't have clients. Just spreadsheets." Their friends chuckled. I said, "Spreadsheets keep roofs from collapsing." Evan smirked. "Sure. But what would you know about holding anything up?" The laughter swelled. Hollow and practiced, I looked at my father across the room. He heard every word, yet turned away, pretending to inspect a wine label. I felt the conversation freeze. Not because of shame, but recognition. I was done letting them define the air I breathed. Dinner dragged on, a chorus of polite insults disguised as banter. Lara leaned in with mock sweetness. "You really should think about dating again. Maybe then you'd understand family responsibility." I replied softly, "I understand responsibility more than anyone at this table." The silence that followed was almost merciful. I finished my water and stood up. Evan frowned. "You're leaving already?" I said. "Yes. Before dessert. I've already had enough." When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed again, my father's message flashing on the screen. "We need your help. The company's short on cash." I stared at it and whispered, "Of course you do. Okay." I called my father that night before the guilt could settle. He answered on the second ring, his tone already shaped like negotiation. "Rach, about the text. I didn't mean to put pressure on you. It's just a temporary shortage." I said, "Dad, you realize you've already had my help. 5 years ago." There was a pause long enough to measure disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he asked, half laughing. "Stonebridge Partners," I said. "The anonymous investor who saved Danner and Sons. That was me." He exhaled sharply. You expect me to believe that? You don't have that kind of capital. I said. You don't have the right kind of memory. No bit. His voice hardened. Rachel, if this is some attempt to make me feel guilty, it's a bad joke. I said. It's not guilt. It's accounting. You signed the agreement yourself. Look at the initials on page 3, he said. I sign 100 documents a month. You can't expect me to keep track. I said. Then maybe that's why your company keeps drowning. He raised his voice. You don't talk to your father that way. I answered. No, just my borrower. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. He said, This family doesn't operate on technicalities. Rachel, I said. That's the problem. You call them technicalities. I call them contracts. He tried softening his tone. You're making this personal. We're talking about keeping the business alive. I said, I'm talking about a debt. You used my capital as your oxygen, then pretended you could still breathe on your own. He said. We were desperate. I did it for the family. I said. And I let you. But now the oxygen is running out. He sighed. You'll destroy everything your grandfather built. I said. No. Dad. You already did when you forgot who paid the bills. After he hung up, I stared at the quiet phone, hearing my own heartbeat count the seconds between love and consequence. I opened my email and typed to Thomas Reed. Activate clause 4B 30-day buyout. When I hit send, I didn't feel revenge. I felt balance. By the next morning, the story had already left the family chat and reached the public feed. Lara posted a photo of herself and Evan, both wearing forced smiles, with a caption that read, Hard times reveal who's real. Some people forget where their name comes from. I stared at it for a moment before the comments poured in half pity, half gossip. When Evan called, his voice cracked between anger and panic. You really think you can scare us with paperwork? He said. I replied, I don't need to scare you. Evan, I just need to remind the bank that your collateral isn't real. He scoffed. You wouldn't do that to family. I said. I already did. Within hours, Thomas confirmed the formal notice had been sent to the Danner & Sons board. The letter from Stonebridge Partners was concise, demanding full payment of $13.2 million within 30 days or triggering a forced sale. My father called 3 times, leaving voicemails layered with authority he didn't have. Evan texted again. You're bluffing. I answered. You'll find out in 29 days. The next message was a photo of their office, captioned, Family Stands Together, posted by Lara like a flag planted on sinking ground. People applauded the performance, not knowing the stage was collapsing beneath them. Thomas emailed later that day. They've reached out to the press. Rumors of internal conflict are spreading. I told him, let them talk. Truth sounds like gossip before it's proven. The observation wasn't bitterness, it was arithmetic. The family had built its image on borrowed credit, public approval as currency, reputation as collateral. Now the numbers were exact. For the first time in years, I wasn't covering their deficit. I was collecting what was owed. 2 days later, my father called. His voice trimmed to corporate politeness. Rachel, I've spoken to counsel. We believe your fund's actions qualify as bad faith interference. You can still stop this. I said. Stop what? Collecting on a contract you signed? He replied. We're prepared to contest it. Stonebridge Partners violated disclosure laws. I said. You mean I violated your comfort? He exhaled slowly. You're not thinking clearly. You'll ruin the company. I said. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. I do. When I walked into his office that afternoon, the air felt borrowed. He didn't stand up. "You came to gloat?" he asked. I said, "I came because you called your lawyer before you called me," he said. "You blindsided us." I said, "No, Dad. You blinded yourself. You used my capital as your trophy money." He slammed his pen down. "I used it to feed your brother's family." I said, "Then maybe they should have learned to cook for themselves." He rose halfway from his chair, anger flickering in his eyes. "You think you're smarter than everyone," I said. "No, just tired of pretending I'm not." It showed. He pointed toward the framed photo of the company's founding team. "You'll destroy everything we built." I said, "You built a facade, not a foundation. I'm just removing the paint." He said, "You can't treat family like clients." I said, "Then maybe family shouldn't treat investors like fools." He leaned back, his voice quieter. "You'll regret this when we lose everything." I said, "I already lost everything that mattered when I realized silence was just another loan." Thomas waited outside, reviewing documents that confirmed the legality of the buyout. My father's signature was clear on every page. He didn't read them then. He was too busy celebrating the money that wasn't his. The evidence was literal ink, not metaphor. As I left, he said, "You'll ruin us all." I turned once and answered, "I didn't ruin you, Dad. I just stopped paying the bill." The observation carried no venom, only math. The emergency meeting felt like theater without an audience. Evan spoke first, pacing near the end of the table. "You don't belong here, Rachel. This is a company meeting." I said, "That's the thing, Evan. I own this table." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Let's not turn this into a circus. We just need a solution." I said, "You had 5 years to find one. I'm simply executing the clause you agreed to." He said, "You're twisting the intent of that contract." I said, "Intent doesn't override ink." "Dad, do." Evan leaned forward, red creeping up his neck. "We'll pay you back half. You can't destroy your own family." I said, "Half of nothing is still nothing. You're out of capital, out of credit, and almost out of time." Laura's voice broke through the tension. "You sound proud of this, like you've been waiting for it." I said, "No, Laura, I've been waiting to stop waiting." My father snapped, "Enough. We can fix this if you stop acting like a stranger." I said, "Then maybe you should stop treating me like a mistake." His eyes flashed. "You're being cruel." I said, "I'm being consistent." I have. Thomas opened his folder and slid a stack of documents forward. "These are the expense reports for the last fiscal year." I said, pulling one toward me. "Evan, 75,000 marked as client development in Palm Springs. There were no clients." He stammered. "That was a strategy retreat." I said, "Then your strategy was embezzlement." Laura tried to cut in. "We needed a break." "The stress," I said. "You charged stress relief to investors. That's not therapy. That's theft." My father muttered, "We all take perks." I said, "You took the company down with your perks." The weight of paper was proof enough. Each page carried its own confession. I turned to my father again. "Consulting fees to a shell firm in your name, $200,000, plus the country club membership, plus the dinners that always happened on your anniversary." He said, "I founded this business. I'm entitled to certain privileges." I said, "You're entitled to a salary, not a slush fund." Evan slammed his palm against the table. "You're tearing us apart for money." I said, "No, for accountability." Iv said, Lara whispered. You'll regret this when we're gone. I said. Then I guess it'll finally be quiet. The observation came naturally because the evidence was right in front of us, empty promises disguised as ledgers. Love itemized into losses. They built an empire of appearances. And now the receipts were due. My father spoke first, his voice thin but stubborn. If we lose the company, we lose our name, I said. You already lost it when you used mine to secure your loans. He blinked. Confusion mixing with pride. What are you talking about? I slid a document across the table. The Danner and Sons assets were pledged under the Rachel Danner Living Trust. You signed that approval when you refinanced last spring. His jaw tightened. You tricked me, I said. No. Dad, you taught me. Never sign what you don't understand. Evan leaned forward, disbelief scraping his voice. You can't just take everything, I said. I'm not taking. I'm collecting, Lara whispered. This is cruelty dressed as logic, I said. No? It's math dressed as memory, my father said. You'll destroy your brother's future, I said. I already saved his past. He tried again. We can negotiate. Rachel, give us time, I said. The time was in the clause you ignored, he said. You wouldn't dare sell to outsiders, I said. I already did. The transfer closed this morning. 2i. Evan slammed his hand against the table. You sold us out? I said. No? I sold the company. You sold yourselves out years ago. He rose, trembling with rage. You think money makes you right? I said. No. But it makes me solvent. My father gripped the edge of the table, his voice cracking. Please. We can rebuild if you let us keep our positions, I said. Positions aren't family. They're privileges. And yours expired. I reached into the folder and placed 3 company credit cards between us. These funded your lives for 5 years. Consider them canceled. Evan stared at them like they were lifelines. You can't just cut us off, I said. Watch me. The sound of the scissors was sharp. In tenure, fine. Each snap was an audit of arrogance. My father whispered. You'll regret this when the dust settles, I said. There's nothing left to settle. Lara's voice trembled. So what happens to us? I said. You rebuild. The way I did without anyone else's money. The evidence was everywhere. Overdraft letters. Unpaid invoices. The ruin disguised as legacy. My father lowered his head. You're firing your own blood, I said. I'm releasing myself from the payroll. Dawes. When the meeting ended, no one moved. The papers. The cards. The silence, all proof of how far love can stretch before it breaks. I looked at them one last time. This isn't personal, I said, echoing the phrase my father had once used to excuse his neglect. It's just business. And business is concluded. Wes. The company's sale closed 3 days later. The wire clearing at 9 a.m. Sharp. I didn't celebrate. I simply exhaled. I bought a small house in Santa Fe. A place quiet enough to hear myself think. The first night there, I unpacked one box and found the letter my father had sent after the sale. It was written on lined paper. Shaky but legible, I finally read the contract. You were right. I should have read everything. I folded it once and placed it in a drawer beside the deed. When Thomas called to confirm the final transfer, he said, It's done. I said, Good. Let it stay done. I spent that evening on the porch. The air cool and clean. The kind that doesn't carry other people's noise. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I thought about the boardroom, the cut cards, the stunned faces, the weight that left with me. Freedom wasn't loud. It was the absence of permission. The next morning, I brewed coffee and watched sunlight stretch across the sand-colored hills. You were right, I whispered to no one, echoing his letter. Understanding comes late. But freedom always arrives on time. For the first time, I wasn't the silent investor. I was the return. Thank you for listening to Rachel's story. If you've ever been the quiet one who kept everything standing while they took you for granted, remember, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Share this story with someone who needs that reminder. And subscribe. Because strength sounds just like this when it finally speaks.